For today's Business Matters, Google has just signed the world's largest corporate clean power pact for hydroelectricity. It's a $3 billion deal with Brookfield Asset Management. It's for electricity generated by 2 hydropower facilities in Pennsylvania. Google also plans to invest $25 billion in data centers across the state and region. The move comes as the tech industry hunts for clean energy to power data centers for artificial intelligence and cloud computing, which has driven power consumption to record highs. Meanwhile, Apple is shoring up its supply of rare earth magnets. The iPhone maker has signed a $500 million deal with Pentagon-backed MP Materials, located in Las Vegas. This makes Apple one of the first U.S. tech companies to centralize its rare earth supply chain inside the county. Right now, China controls the vast majority of the rare earth industry. In March, China halted exports to the U.S. amid trade tensions, underscoring the need for other suppliers. And OPEC is standing by its forecast for global growth in oil demand in 2025 and 26. The Organization of Oil-Producing Nations explains that India, China, Brazil are outperforming expectations so far. There's also a continued rebound in the U.S. and Eurozone. Despite trade conflicts, this has OPEC believing the world economy may do better than expected in the second half of the year. Oil prices have found support from rising seasonal demand. OPEC says it expects crude oil intake at refineries to remain elevated to meet an uptick in summer travel. Inflation in the U.S. is on the rise for the second consecutive month. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports the annual inflation rate climbed to 2.7% in June, marking its largest increase in 5 months. The June reading aligned with expectations predicted by economists, and it provided little indication whether tariffs were triggering price pressures. The shelter index rose 0.2% in June. That measures the cost of housing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics noted that it was the primary factor in last month's increase. Still, on a 12-month basis, shelter inflation eased to 3.8%. In response to the latest data, President Trump again called on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Fed should cut rates by 3 points, adding $1 trillion a year would be saved." Starbucks employees will soon be required to commute to work 1 extra day per week. The coffee giant has announced it's required 3 days in the office and moving to 4. The change begins in the new fiscal year and will apply to all North American regional offices and the company's support centers in Seattle and Toronto. Starbucks officials say the move will benefit the brand because they say the best work of employees comes from working together. The company says this matters even more now as it looks to turn its business around. Employees who choose to leave due to the schedule adjustment will be offered a one-time voluntary exit program. According to the Pew Research Center, 3/4 of U.S. adults have a job where they can work remotely for at least part of the week. Nearly half of those polled said they would likely quit if their employer took away that flexibility. Mark Zuckerberg said on Monday that Meta Platforms would spend hundreds of billions of dollars to build several massive AI data centers for superintelligence, intensifying his pursuit of a technology he has chased with the talent war for top engineers. Here's more.
Mark Zuckerberg is placing a very big bet on AI. The Meta Platforms boss said Monday that the firm would spend hundreds of billions of dollars building several massive data centers. They're meant to drive Meta's bid to win the race for so-called superintelligence. That's AI that exceeds human capabilities. Zuckerberg says the first of the new mega data centers, dubbed Prometheus, is set to come online next year. He touted the strength of the company's core advertising business to justify the spending. Meta last month reorganized its AI efforts under a division called Superintelligence Labs. That followed setbacks for its Llama 4 model and the departure of key staff. The firm is betting the new unit will generate revenue from products like smart glasses and new advertising tools. It has also been recruiting aggressively to staff the new outfit. However, one analyst said Zuckerberg's AI investment plan is really a long-term bet, not one that will generate major income anytime soon.
The global destruction of wetlands could mean losing $39 trillion in economic benefits by 2050. That's the warning coming from the Convention on Wetlands ahead of a global preservation meeting. In a new report, the organization found about 22% of wetland and coastal marine systems have disappeared since the 70s. That's the fastest pace of loss of any ecosystem. Wetland deterioration is the worst in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and it's getting worse in Europe and North America. Economic benefits from wetlands include flood regulation, water purification, and carbon storage. They also support the fishery and agriculture industries and offer cultural benefits. 5 years since the pandemic home buying boom, the mood among Americans looking to make a big move seems to be souring. Here's a look at what potential buyers and sellers need to know right now.
Interest rates have pushed mortgage rates higher while home prices continue to climb in many parts of the country, leaving the housing market in a sticky situation.
The housing market's in a really unusual place right now. It's a strange combination of record high home prices and then very low home sales. And all of that's a hangover from the pandemic.
Bankrate housing market analyst Jeff Ostrowski says their research indicates more homeowners are hesitant to make a move.
The idea being they don't want to sell at a mortgage rate above 6% because that means they're going to have to go out and finance their next place at more than 6%.
Zillow senior economist Orphe Divounguy says overall economic uncertainty is rattling the market too.
Remember, when people are uncertain about the future, their future income prospects, well, they tend to sit on their wallets.
And affordability is improving according to Zillow's data, but remains stretched.
The increase in prices, the increase in mortgage rates in the past few years really means that the typical buyer today really needs a lot more to be able to get into the house.
That means first-time buyers may have to make some trade-offs.
Maybe it's a townhouse, maybe it's a fixer-upper, maybe it's a place in a neighborhood that's not your first choice. But definitely this housing market has forced first-time buyers to make compromises.
And while potential home buyers may be nostalgic for the low mortgage rates of the pandemic era, Ostrowski says they're unlikely to return anytime soon.
And big changes are now coming to how students and parents will borrow federal money to help pay for college. Under President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill, recently signed into law, there will be limits on borrowing for federal student loans and a reduction in the number of repayment options you can choose. Here's more.
The average cost of college tuition and fees at public institutions has risen about 141% over the last 20 years. Right now, nearly 43 million people have federal student loan debt, according to the U.S. government. If you're taking out a loan to pay for college, there's some big changes for students and parents.
You're not going to be able to borrow as much as you could in the past.
Michelle Singletary is a personal finance columnist at the Washington Post. She says President Donald Trump's Big Beautiful Bill overhauls borrowing for families. Under the Parent Plus program, parents will be able to borrow only $20,000 per year or $65,000 total per undergraduate student in federal loans.
I've dealt with a lot of students and parents who have borrowed way too much for college.
Under the Repayment Assistance Plan, borrowers who take out loans after July 1st of 2026 will be allowed to pay based on income.
There's sort of a new standard payment, which will give people some people longer to pay the loans, which means their monthly payments will be lower, but you're going to pay more in interest.
Borrowers whose federal student loan interest payments were halted under the Biden administration will now have to pay that interest beginning August 1st.
That break is ending, and you need to get in contact with your loan servicer as soon as possible.
There are other ways to get financial help besides federal loans. Some of those options include scholarships, grants, and work-study jobs.
Importers gave the port of Los Angeles a major boost in June as they pushed to rush to beat looming tariffs. The port of Los Angeles saw record-breaking cargo volume in June, up 32% from May. Importers were racing to get goods in before the July 9th tariff pause expired. Now, with the new deadline of August 1st, businesses are scrambling once again. President Trump's latest tariff plan includes steep hikes on goods from the EU, Canada, China, and more. That's pushing retailers to stock up early, especially ahead of the holiday season. But port officials expect volume to drop sharply in August as companies avoid speculative ordering and brace for higher costs. The U.S. has unearthed a new strategy to strengthen the American rare earth industry and take on China, which dominates the market for strategic minerals. Here's more.
Rare earth minerals have taken the spotlight as China's recent export curbs revealed just how reliant the world is on China, which controls about 90% of the supply. The 17 rare earth metals are critical for super strong magnets used in military applications like drones and fighter jets. They also power motors in EVs and wind turbines. China sets low prices for the minerals, part of the reason it controls the industry. It's also crushed incentive for investments elsewhere. That's why miners in the West have long called for a separate pricing system to help them compete. The Department of Defense now says it will guarantee a minimum price at twice the current market level to its only domestic rare earth producer, MP Materials. Under the deal, the DoD will become the company's largest shareholder with a 15% stake, and MP will construct a second manufacturing facility in the U.S. Analysts say the deal will have global implications. They say it's a positive for producers, but may increase costs for consumers.
Nvidia said it plans to resume sales of its H20 artificial intelligence chip to China, days after its CEO, who is visiting Beijing, met U.S. President Donald Trump. Here's more.
Nvidia is set to resume selling AI chips to China. The company said in a statement that it's seeking permission from Washington for the move. That comes days after boss Jensen Huang met with US President Donald Trump. Nvidia's AI chips have been a key focus of US export controls over concern they could be used by China's military. The firm has said the curbs could cut its sales by $15 billion. Now Huang is expected to hold a media briefing in Beijing on Wednesday, where he's attending a trade expo. His visit will be closely watched by the US, where two lawmakers have asked him not to meet companies linked to defense or intelligence applications. On Tuesday, he told state media in the country that it was crucial for American companies to establish roots in China. Nvidia faces growing competition from Chinese tech rivals, including Huawei. But firms in the country remain hungry for its AI chips. Now the US giant says it will develop a new model for the Chinese market, ensuring it is fully compliant with all US export controls. The move to resume sales comes after Washington and Beijing agreed a provisional trade truce. However, it's unclear how long that will last, with China facing an August 12th deadline to reach a durable deal with the White House.
China's property slump continues to drag. New data reveals new home prices fell at the fastest monthly pace in 8 months in June. This is based on calculations by Reuters using data from the National Bureau of Statistics. The month-on-month drop was steeper than in May and extended a weak trend that has persisted since 2023. On top of a slowed property sector, China is also dealing with factory gate deflation, subdued consumer demand, and geopolitical tensions with the U.S. Beijing has tried to prop up the property market and broader economy with policies such as local buying housing inventories and undeveloped land and reducing mortgage rates. But there are calls for additional support measures. And China's economy slowed in the second quarter, even as it topped market forecasts showing resilience against U.S. tariffs. Analysts warn of underlying weakness and rising risks that will ramp up pressure on Beijing to roll out more stimulus. Here's more.
China's economy showed GDP growing 5.2% on the year over the April to June quarter. That was slightly down on the previous period, but beat analyst forecasts. The numbers were helped as factories rushed out shipments to take advantage of the current trade truce with the US. But that leaves investors bracing for a weaker second half as exports cool off. Other figures released the same day also show parts of the economy still under strain. Retail sales growth slowed sharply in June, hitting its lowest level since the first months of the year. The country's ailing property sector also remains a drag, with home prices falling at their fastest pace in 8 months. Such negatives mean Beijing will remain under pressure to do more stimulus measures. Policymakers have already ramped up infrastructure spending and consumer subsidies in response, alongside steady monetary easing. Now investors will be closely watching a meeting of the ruling Politburo in late July for any signs of action. Some expect the government to boost spending if future data points to a downturn. But with deflation entrenched and domestic demand weak, it won't be easy to drive renewed activity. That could make hitting the official goal of about 5% growth this year a daunting task.
And onto markets, the Nasdaq closed at a record high today, its 8th record since June 27th. It's driven largely by a surge in Nvidia shares, which jumped after the company announced it would resume sales of its H20 AI chips to China. This boosted other chip makers as well, like AMD and Supermicro Computer, along with broader tech indexes. Despite the Nasdaq's gain, the S&P 500 and Dow Jones ended lower, as investors reacted coolly to key inflation data and the start of second quarter earnings season. Investors, meanwhile, are cautiously watching for signs that tariff-driven inflation may be building, with June CPI showing the biggest jump in 5 months. And that's it today for Business Matters.